The last thing I remembered from my previous life was the sickening crunch of a bespoke Italian loafer against my ribs, the taste of copper, and the cold concrete of a subterranean parking garage, a hostile takeover in the most literal sense, courtesy of a partner I had foolishly trusted. Now there was only the aggressive hum of industrial air conditioning and the clinical glare of a halogen bulb. I was sitting in a windowless room. The acoustic dampening in the walls and the reinforced steel door told me exactly where I was security holding level B2 Sterling Tower, Manhattan. I knew the specs of this building better than its architects. I had spent the last decade of my life cleaning up the PR disasters of the billionaires who occupied its penthouses. But I was not Julian Vance Sr. crisis fixer anymore. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly, a residual physiological response from the previous occupant. Thin, uncalloused, and currently clutching a cheap plastic ballpoint pen. My reflection in the polished surface of the stainless steel table revealed a pale 20-something kid with eyes red from hours of weeping. Jewel, that was my new name according to the chaotic rush of memories that had flooded my brain when I woke up 10 minutes ago. A low-level logistics assistant in the Sterling Empire. And as of this morning, a prime suspect for corporate espionage. Victoria Thorne, a board member and the reigning ice queen of Manhattan society, had meticulously framed this poor kid for selling trade secrets to a rival tech firm. It was a masterpiece of a setup. The digital paper trail was damning, the planted evidence flawless. The original Jules had suffered a complete mental collapse under the interrogation, crying, begging, and pleading for a mercy that did not exist on Wall Street. His heart had literally given out from the sheer terror of facing federal prison. Then I woke up in his place. Across the table, a man in a mid-range Brooks Brothers suit was shouting at me. He was a mid-level security director, sweating through his collar, reciting a list of criminal charges that carried a minimum sentence of 20 years. I did not hear most of it. I was busy assessing the collateral damage and, more importantly, the PR metrics of my current situation. A sharp click sounded as my thumb pressed the top of the cheap ballpoint pen. The sound cut through the interrogator's monologue. He paused, blinking in confusion at the sudden absence of my tears. The pen clicked again. I looked up. The panic was gone from my face, replaced by a flat sociopathic neutrality that I had spent years perfecting. Being framed for espionage by a Thorne was, objectively speaking, a catastrophe, but from a media standpoint, it was phenomenal branding. Until yesterday, Jewel was a ghost. Today, every executive from the 50th floor to the penthouse knew his name. Infamy was just fame waiting to be monetized. "Are you even listening to me, you little thief?" The suit snarled, slamming his hands on the table. I ignored him. My attention drifted to the large mirror occupying the right wall. It was a two-way observation glass. The lighting in my room was slightly too bright, the ambient shadow behind the glass just a fraction too deep. Someone was standing behind it. Someone important. The suit was acting too performative, projecting his voice for an audience. Victoria Thorne would not come down to the basement. She did not like the smell of desperation. That left only one person in the Sterling Empire who had the clearance and the obsessive need to personally witness the destruction of a traitor. Alexander Sterling, the sole heir, the future CEO, and a man who possessed the emotional warmth of a liquid nitrogen bath. With another click of the pen, I did not beg. I did not look at the suit. Instead, I uncapped the pen, leaned over the pristine stainless steel table, and began to draw. I sketched a rapid, precise cost-benefit matrix directly onto the metal surface. I mapped out the projected stock dip Sterling Empire would suffer if a low-level espionage scandal went public, versus the cost of quietly sweeping me under the rug. The math was simple. It was cheaper to exile me than to prosecute me. I finished the chart, capped the pen, and looked directly into the two-way mirror. I did not glare. I just offered the glass the calm, dead-eyed stare of a man evaluating a balance sheet. I knew Alex Sterling was standing right there in the dark, watching a supposedly broken kid suddenly calculate corporate leverage with the cold precision of a veteran banker. Let him look. 10 minutes later, the door opened. A senior HR executive walked in looking thoroughly bewildered. There would be no police, no federal charges. I was being stripped of my corporate access, my salary halved, and indefinitely exiled to Sector 47, a decaying overflow logistics warehouse in the depths of Queens, where the company sent its undesirables to rot until they quit. They thought it was a punishment. I saw it as seed capital. An hour later, I was standing on a grimy sidewalk in Queens, holding a cardboard box containing a stapler, a mug, and a stolen ledger. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and stale rain. I pulled out the cheap ballpoint pen and a small, battered notebook from my pocket. I wrote down a single number on the first page, $5 million. $5 million in liquid cash. That was what I needed to buy a bulletproof new identity, a one-way ticket to Zurich, and a quiet retirement in the Alps. I looked up at the rusting metal sign of Sector 47. A ghost smile touched my lips. I was at the absolute bottom of the food chain, universally despised and officially branded a corporate spy. It was the perfect place to start a business. Sector 47 was exactly what HR promised, an architectural manifestation of corporate depression. It was a dumping ground for obsolete electronics, forgotten filing cabinets, and employees the Sterling Empire wanted to passively, aggressively terminate. But depression is highly predictable, which makes it highly profitable. In 2 weeks, I realized the warehouse supplied everything the mid-level executives upstairs desperately needed, but could not requisition through official channels. I started small. Premium espresso beans bypassed from the executive suites, high-end ergonomic chairs supposedly lost in transit. By week 3, I was brokering something far more valuable: discretion. I became the central node for misplaced data drives, secure burner phones, and untraceable courier services. Mid-level managers who actively despised my name would authorize exorbitant supply requisitions to my sector just to buy my silence on their departmental affairs. I was turning my infamy into a premium subscription service. The $5 million goal in my battered notebook was currently sitting at a respectable $14,200. Progress. It was raining on a Tuesday night when the apex predator finally visited the pen. I was in the back office, a windowless cube lit only by a flickering fluorescent tube and the glow of a decrypted laptop. The pen clicked twice. I was cross-referencing a supply route for illicit non-FDA-approved Focus Pharmaceuticals favored by the trading floor when the heavy metal door groaned open. I did not look up. If you are here for the smuggled Adderall, you are 4 hours early, Davis. I said, my voice flat. I have never required chemical assistance to do my job, Jules. The voice was a perfectly modulated, aristocratic baritone that dropped the ambient temperature of the room by 10 degrees. I paused. I capped my pen. I looked up. Alexander Sterling was standing in my doorway. He was wearing a midnight blue Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than the annual operating budget of this entire zip code. Raindrops clung to his broad shoulders. He looked entirely out of place amidst the water damage and cardboard, yet he commanded the space with a suffocating gravity. He stepped inside, his pale, piercing eyes scanning the neatly stacked boxes of contraband Cuban cigars, the encrypted ledger on my desk, and finally my face. He was looking for the weeping, broken kid from the interrogation room. You seem to be adjusting well to exile. Alex noted his tone laced with a dry, razor-sharp amusement. I expected to find you hanging from the rafters. Instead, I find you running a black market distribution ring right under my nose. I leaned back in my cheap office chair. It squeaked aggressively, undermining the gravitas of the moment, but I ignored it. Sector 47 is chronically underutilized. I'm simply optimizing supply chain logistics. I provide a service the market responds. Capitalism at its finest, Mr. Sterling. He walked closer, picking up a box of the Monte Cristos. This is felony embezzlement, extortion, and trafficking. Objectively true, I agreed without a spike in my heart rate. However, if you report me, the subsequent internal investigation will reveal that 3 of your senior vice presidents are currently buying silence regarding their offshore accounts through my network. Sterling Empire stock drops 3% by Friday on the PR fallout alone. Can you afford that right before the quarterly earnings call? Alex stopped. He looked at me. Really looked at me. The sociopathic neutrality I maintained did not waver under his scrutiny. He was a man obsessed with absolute control and ruthless efficiency, and he was currently looking at an anomaly he could not categorize. You are remarkably calm for a man who is 1 phone call away from Rikers Island, he murmured, stepping so close I could smell his cologne, something sharp, expensive, and cold. Panic is bad for the profit margins. I picked up my pen. I clicked the mechanism. Since you have not called corporate security yet, I assume you are here to negotiate. I am currently accepting strategic shareholders. I offer absolute discretion and a 10% cut of the gross. In exchange, you look the other way. A slow, dangerous smile finally curved his lips. It was a terrifying expression devoid of actual warmth. "You are trying to extort the future CEO of the company you are actively stealing from." "I prefer the term leveraged partnership." Alex let out a short, breathy sound that might have been a laugh if he possessed a soul. He tossed the box of cigars back onto the pile. "You are greedy, Jules, and you are breathtakingly arrogant." He turned toward the door, pausing with his hand on the rusted handle. He did not look back as he spoke. "The firewall for the internal logistics server updates every Thursday at 3:00 a.m. The backdoor override code is Icarus 77. Do try not to get caught by someone less forgiving than I am." The door clicked shut behind him. I sat in the silence for a full minute, listening to the rain hammer against the corrugated tin roof. I looked at the encrypted laptop screen. He had not shut me down, he had just capitalized my venture. He had given me the keys to the corporate kingdom because deep down he recognized a fellow pragmatist. We both worshipped at the altar of efficiency. I opened my battered notebook. I flipped past the page with the $5 million target and started a new list. I wrote a single line under a new heading. Angel investor Alexander Sterling. Status high, legal risk. High yield. In the weeks that followed, a strange pattern emerged. The exclusive galas and high society dinners in Manhattan began to see less of the Sterling heir. Instead, on random late evenings, a sleek black Maybach would park discreetly in an alleyway in Queens. Alex would walk into my dilapidated office, pour himself a glass of my smuggled Macallan, and silently watch me balance the books. He thought he was monitoring a threat. I knew better. We were both addicts. I was addicted to the numbers. And Alex Sterling was becoming addicted to the one thing in his empire he could not control. By the fourth month, Sector 47 was no longer a warehouse. It was the shadow nervous system of the Sterling Empire. I had bypassed the corporate bureaucracy entirely, establishing a supply chain so efficient that department heads on the 60th floor were actively sabotaging their own official requisitions just to route requests through me. But my most profitable venture was taxing my enemies. Victoria Thorne's faction, the very people who had meticulously framed me for espionage, were bleeding cash. They needed secure, untraceable communication lines to coordinate their internal boardroom coups. Through a series of dummy shell companies and encrypted VPNs, I became their exclusive provider. I charged them a 400% markup. It was poetic justice, highly monetized. Whenever they complained about the exorbitant fees, I simply adjusted my algorithm to throttle their bandwidth. Supply and demand was a beautiful weapon. My battered notebook was filling up quickly. The Zurich Retirement Fund had aggressively scaled to $1.2 million. The late-night summits with Alex Sterling became a structural element of my week. Usually Tuesdays and Thursdays, he would arrive after a gala or a grueling board meeting, stepping out of his Maybach in a bespoke tuxedo, looking like a sovereign descending into the slums. He never announced his arrivals. The heavy metal door would groan open and the ambient temperature of my office would drop as his presence consumed the room. He did not come to check the logistics ledger anymore. He came for the argument. "Your valuation model on the Kessler Tech acquisition is fundamentally flawed," Alex stated one evening, swirling 2 fingers of Macallan 25 in a crystal glass I had procured specifically for his visits. He was leaning against a stack of stolen server racks, his bow tie undone, radiating an exhausted but predatory energy. I did not look away from my monitors. I clicked my ballpoint pen. "My model accounts for Kessler's pending litigation in the EU. Yours relies on the assumption that you can bribe the regulatory committee before Q3. That is an operational inefficiency masquerading as a strategy. It is not bribery, Jewel. It is aggressive lobbying. A semantic distinction for a tax audit." Another click of the pen sounded. "If you restructure the acquisition through a Cayman holding subsidiary, you bypass the EU friction entirely and save 12% on capital gains." Alex went still. The clinking of ice against crystal stopped. I could feel his gaze on the side of my face, sharp and dissecting. He was not looking at me like a subordinate or even a black market rogue. He was looking at me like a peer. "You calculated the Cayman tax delta in your head while simultaneously running a smuggling ring for corporate smartphones," he asked, his baritone dropping a register. "Multitasking is a requisite skill for survival," I replied dryly, uncapping my pen to jot down a shipping manifest. Also, your CFO is an idiot. You should fire him and hire an algorithm." Alex let out that quiet, breathy sound, the closest thing to a laugh he ever produced. He pushed off the server rack and walked over to my desk. He did not invade my personal space, but he stood close enough that the scent of his sharp, cold cologne mixed with the smell of old paper and ozone in my office. "You are a terrifying creature, Jules," he murmured, his pale eyes tracking the movement of my pen across the ledger. "A complete sociopath, entirely motivated by fiscal logic. It is profoundly refreshing." "I am simply a product of my environment, Mr. Sterling. Call me Alex," he said. It was not a request. It was an executive directive. The nights bled into weeks. The dynamic shifted from surveillance to something dangerously akin to symbiosis. We did not talk about our personal lives. We did not exchange emotional pleasantries. We communicated strictly through the language of leverage market fluctuations and ruthless corporate strategy. But a rhythm developed between us in the windowless cube of Sector 47. The pen clicked twice, marking the sound of my calculating profit margins. A glass clinked, marking the sound of his glass as he analyzed my logic. We were two apex predators sitting in a cage of our own making, finding a bizarre intellectual parody in the dark. I was building my exit strategy, and he was running an empire, yet somehow, the most vital part of our days was this midnight intersection in Queens. Then the disruption occurred. In late November, Alex flew to Geneva for the World Economic Forum. It was a mandatory week-long summit. He had casually mentioned it 2 days prior, dismissing it as a logistical annoyance. On the first night of his absence, I sat in my office. The warehouse was running flawlessly. The automated scripts were routing secure files, the offshore accounts were accruing interest, and the ledger was perfectly balanced. But the silence in the room was deafening. I stared at the empty crystal glass sitting on the edge of my desk. My hand moved automatically. I clicked the pen repeatedly. I found myself actively waiting for the heavy metal door to groan open. I caught myself mentally drafting an argument regarding short-selling biotech stocks just to see how he would counter it. I paused, freezing with my thumb hovering over the pen. I was a man who quantified everything. I did not allow for variables I could not control. Yet here I was experiencing an aggressive spike in cortisol because a tyrannical billionaire was not sitting on a pile of stolen electronics in my office. I opened my battered notebook to the page with the $5 million target. I stared at the numbers. They were clean, logical, and safe. But for the first time since I woke up in this body, the idea of sitting alone in an alpine chalet in Zurich felt less like a retirement and more like an exile. I capped the pen slowly. I had identified a critical vulnerability in my system. It was not a supply chain issue. It was Alexander Sterling. And from a strictly analytical standpoint, I had absolutely no idea how to hedge against him. The ledger screen glowed with the precise clinical green that usually signaled absolute victory. Account balance $5,012,400. Liquid dispersed across 3 Cayman Holdings subsidiaries and entirely untraceable. I had reached the target. A one-way first-class ticket on Swissair Flight 17 out of JFK was currently resting in my inner breast pocket, pressed neatly against a pristine passport bearing the name Arthur Pendleton. It was Tuesday 9:30 p.m. I was officially fully capitalized and ready to retire. I pulled out my pen. A sharp click sounded. I sat in the dim light of Sector 47 and waited for the profound relief of safety to wash over me. Instead, my chest felt strangely tight, a phantom physiological response that I instantly diagnosed as a lingering, irrational attachment to my operational setup. Then the Bloomberg terminal on my left monitor began to flash violently red. Sterling Empire stock was tanking. 3%, 5%, then a catastrophic 8% drop within 20 minutes. I leaned forward, my fingers flying across the decrypted keyboard. It was a highly coordinated short squeeze. Someone was dumping massive blocks of shares through untraceable proxy firms, artificially driving the price into the ground to trigger an algorithmic sell-off. Before I could run a trace on the proxy IP addresses, my encrypted burner phone vibrated. A text from an asset I cultivated in the Eastern District Attorney's Office read, "SEC and FBI moving on Sector 47. Tip-off about offshore laundering and sanctions evasion. Warrants issued. You have 20 minutes. Get out. Victoria Thorne." I had to pause and admire the sheer brute force efficiency of her play. She could not dismantle my shadow supply chain, so she decided to burn down the entire warehouse and tank the company's valuation to oust Alex while he was trapped in Geneva. It was a masterful, albeit highly destructive corporate coup. My protocol was firmly established for exactly this scenario: total asset liquidation and immediate evasion. I initiated the magnetic wipe sequence on all primary servers. The hard drives began their high-pitched whine as terabytes of extortion material leverage and shadow ledgers were permanently overwritten. I grabbed my battered notebook, the false passport, and a localized EMP device, tossing them into a sleek leather duffel bag. I took one last look at the dilapidated office. The water stains on the ceiling, the flickering fluorescent tube, the expensive crystal glass Alex used to drink from currently sitting empty on the edge of my desk. Rapid clicks echoed as my thumb hammered the pen. My heart rate was spiking to 120 beats per minute. Was it the fear of federal prison? No. It was an acute, entirely illogical reluctance to abandon the board before the game was definitively finished. I capped the pen. Logic had to prevail. Emotional variables were bad for business. I turned toward the emergency exit. The main heavy metal door did not just open, it was violently kicked off its rusted latch. It crashed against the concrete wall with a deafening screech that echoed through the empty warehouse. I froze my hand, dropping instinctively toward the tactical flashlight in my duffel bag. But it was not the FBI. It was Alexander Sterling. He should not have been in the hemisphere. He was supposed to be moderating a panel in Switzerland. But here he was, standing in the doorway, rain soaking the shoulders of his charcoal cashmere overcoat, his chest heaving with exertion. The usual aristocratic ice in his pale eyes was completely gone, replaced by a raw predatory fury that actually made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He did not look at the wiping servers. He did not look at the Bloomberg terminal, showing his empire bleeding billions in market cap. He walked straight toward me, his bespoke boots crunching over discarded cardboard. "You're back early," I stated, forcing my voice into its flat standard register, though it took effort. "The SEC is en route." Thorne initiated a short squeeze. "You need to mobilize your legal team and freeze trading." I did not get to finish the tactical briefing. Alex crossed the final 5 feet in a blur of motion, grabbing the lapels of my jacket and slamming me backward against the cinderblock wall. The impact knocked the breath out of my lungs in a sharp gasp. My duffel bag hit the floor. The Swiss Air ticket spilled out crisp and white against the grime. Alex looked down at the ticket, then snapped his gaze back up to my face. The proximity was suffocating. The cold, sharp scent of his cologne was mixed with aviation fuel and the ozone smell of the rain. "Swiss Air." He hissed the word, sounding like a literal curse in his mouth. "Flight 17, leaving in 3 hours. It is a standard exit strategy," I managed to say, maintaining steady eye contact despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "The parameters of my stay have been compromised from a risk management perspective." Risk management. Alex's voice dropped to a lethal vibrating whisper. He crowded closer, his forearm pressing heavily against my collarbone, pinning me in place. He was practically vibrating with rage. "I funneled resources into your shadow ecosystem. I manipulated the entire executive board to cover your tracks. I let you turn my company into your personal, illegal playground." He leaned in his mouth inches from my ear, his breath hot against my cold skin. "I poured capital into this partnership, Jules. I have not even begun to collect on my return on investment. And you dare declare bankruptcy and run. The FBI is 10 minutes away." "Alex," I said, my voice tight. "We are both a massive liability to each other right now. I do not give a damn about the FBI. I do not give a damn about Victoria Thorne." He shifted his grip, one hand releasing my lapel to press flat against the concrete wall beside my head, caging me in completely. His thumb brushed the line of my jaw, a touch that was jarringly gentle compared to the sheer violence of his stance. "I am a very greedy man," he murmured, his pale eyes burning into mine with an intensity that defied all logic. "I do not write off my investments, and I am absolutely not letting you go." The sheer gravitational pull of Alexander Sterling pressing me against the cinderblock wall was actively disrupting my cognitive processing. My heart rate, previously stabilized at a manageable 120 beats per minute due to the adrenaline of the FBI raid, spiked to a completely unprofessional 145. I needed to de-escalate, fast. "Alex," I said, forcing a calm I did not entirely possess. "The Eastern District Attorney has signed the warrants. They will breach Sector 47 in exactly 7 minutes. If they find the CEO of Sterling Empire physically cornering the primary suspect of a federal money laundering investigation, your stock price will not just tank, it will be delisted. Alex did not flinch. He did not even blink. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his soaked cashmere overcoat, pulled out his personal secure phone, and hit a single speed dial number with his free hand. "It is Sterling," he said into the device, his eyes never leaving mine. "Initiate protocol Omega. Freeze all trading. Have the SEC director call my private line immediately. And contact the FBI Eastern District Field Office. Tell them Sector 47 is currently a classified corporate audit site under my direct supervision. Any unauthorized breach will be met with a federal injunction and a multi-billion-dollar countersuit." He ended the call and tossed the phone onto my desk. I stared at him. He had not just called off the dogs, he had bought the entire kennel. It was a display of absolute terrifying corporate autocracy. "There," Alex whispered, the predatory edge still sharp in his voice. "The external variables are neutralized. Now we are going to discuss your exit strategy, Jules, or rather the lack of it." He stepped back, releasing the cage he had formed around me. The sudden absence of his body heat left the damp air feeling 10 degrees colder. He picked up my Swissair ticket from the floor, looked at it with profound disgust, and deliberately tore it precisely in half. "You are not going to Zurich," he stated, dropping the pieces onto the concrete. "You are moving into the secure penthouse suite at the Sterling Tower. You will assume the newly created, highly classified role of Shadow Director of Strategy. You will fix this short squeeze, you will dismantle Victoria Thorne's faction, and you will do it from within my inner circle." I smoothed my rumpled lapels, trying to regain my equilibrium. "That sounds like an indefinite contract with highly ambiguous parameters." "It is a monopoly," Alex corrected, his pale eyes burning. "I am acquiring your exclusive services. In exchange, I offer absolute legal immunity, limitless capital, and my personal protection." 4 hours later, I was sitting on a custom Italian leather sofa in a penthouse suite overlooking the glittering grid of Manhattan. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the aggressive hum of Sector 47. I pulled out my cheap ballpoint pen and my battered notebook. I needed to quantify this. I was a man who survived by analyzing data, and my current data set was a chaotic mess. The pen clicked twice. I started a new page. A SWOT analysis. It was the only way to process the catastrophic failure of my emotional firewall. Subject: Alexander Sterling. Strengths: infinite capital leverage, impeccable strategic vision, willingness to commit federal obstruction of justice on my behalf. Weaknesses: pathologically possessive, volatile emotional investment. Opportunities: absolute operational control over a multi-billion-dollar empire. Threats: total systemic collapse of my personal boundaries. I stared at the list. It was useless. Another click sounded. The math did not work. I was trying to calculate the return on investment of something that defied fiscal logic. Why was I still here? Why had I not fought harder to get on that plane? Because Alexander Sterling had become a non-quantifiable variable in my life. He was a risk I actively wanted to hold in my portfolio. It was a terrifying realization. I hated variables. Needing something concrete to anchor my panic, I opened my encrypted laptop. Alex had granted me top-tier server access. I decided to run a forensic audit on the wiped data from Sector 47 using a mirrored backup I had naturally kept hidden on a decentralized cloud. I traced the offshore accounts, cross-referencing the operational costs of my shadow supply chain against the Sterling Empire's general ledger. I was looking for the trail the FBI had followed. Instead, I found an anomaly, a massive one. Sector 47 should not have survived its second month. My supply chain was efficient, but it had generated massive logistical footprints. There should have been automatic internal audits triggered by the sudden rerouting of premium assets to a decaying warehouse in Queens. Why had there not been? My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing 3 layers of corporate security. I found the buried audit reports. They had been flagged, compiled, and then manually overridden. Every single month. I traced the override authorization. It came from the CEO's office. I stopped breathing for a second. Alex had not just looked the other way. He had actively buried the audits. He had absorbed a $12 million departmental deficit in Q3 alone, hiding it under research and development expenditures just to let me play in my warehouse. He had manipulated the entire executive board to ensure my illicit operations ran smoothly. He had capitalized my venture invisibly entirely at his own expense, expecting absolutely no financial return. I stared at the glowing green numbers on the screen. The math was right there. It was not just tolerance, it was systemic, ruinously expensive protection. He had built a fortress around me while I was busy planning my escape. A quiet click echoed. I capped the pen slowly. I looked at the ripped pieces of the Zurich ticket I had salvaged from the warehouse floor. The idea of safety in the Alps now felt completely hollow. I was heavily, dangerously invested in Alexander Sterling. The only logical next step was to go all in. I did not go to sleep that night. Instead, I spent the next 48 hours executing the most aggressive corporate warfare campaign of my 2 lifetimes. I was going all in, which meant I needed to offer Victoria Thorne the exact bait she had been hunting for my supposedly indestructible black market ledger. I deliberately downgraded the firewall on my secondary cloud backup. I made it look like a sloppy oversight caused by the chaos of the FBI raid. It took Thorne's private security firm exactly 6 hours to hack it and download the encrypted files. They thought they had captured the atomic bomb that would destroy Alex Sterling. They had no idea I built the bomb specifically for them to detonate. The emergency board meeting was convened on Friday at 9:00 a.m. on the 80th floor. The room was a monument to billionaire austerity, frosted glass, cold steel, and a massive mahogany table surrounded by the 12 most ruthless executives in Manhattan. Alex sat at the head of the table. He looked immaculate, impassive, and entirely lethal. He had insisted I attend standing quietly in the corner behind his chair, officially designated as his strategic advisor. The board members glared at me with naked contempt, but none dared challenge Alex's authority. Not yet. Victoria Thorne stood at the opposite end. She was practically vibrating with triumphant energy. She did not waste time on pleasantries. "Alexander," she began, her voice ringing with rehearsed sorrow. "It is with profound regret that I must present evidence of gross negligence, embezzlement, and systemic fraud occurring under your direct supervision." She gestured to her assistant, who connected a tablet to the room's primary projector. The massive screen on the wall illuminated, displaying pages of complex financial data, offshore account numbers, and routing codes. "This," Victoria announced, pointing a manicured finger at the screen, "is the master ledger of the black market operation run by the man standing behind you. An operation you have actively protected. This ledger proves the diversion of corporate funds to shadow entities. It is enough to trigger an immediate SEC indictment." The boardroom erupted into carefully orchestrated murmurs of shock. Several board members allied with Thorne immediately demanded a vote of no confidence. Alex did not react. He did not defend himself. He just leaned back in his chair, his pale eyes fixed on Victoria with the clinical detachment of a biologist watching a specimen wriggle on a pin. He knew I had a plan, even though I had not told him the specifics. He trusted my math. I stepped forward from the shadows. A sharp click sounded. The sound of my ballpoint pen silenced the room. 12 heads snapped toward me. "Mrs. Thorne," I said, my voice flat and carrying perfectly across the mahogany, "your cybersecurity team is embarrassingly incompetent. You did not steal my ledger. You downloaded a Trojan horse." Victoria's triumphant smile faltered a fraction of an inch. "Excuse me. You assume my supply chain was built to hide my money." I continued pacing slowly behind Alex's chair. "That was your critical flaw. You projected your own greed onto me. I did not need to launder $5 million. I needed a mechanism to track the $300 million you and your faction have been quietly siphoning from the Sterling Empire over the past decade." I pulled my encrypted phone from my pocket and tapped a single command. The data on the massive projector screen abruptly shifted. The columns of offshore accounts reconfigured. The dummy corporate names dissolved, revealing their true underlying beneficial owners. Thorne Holdings LLC, Victoria Thorne, the Thorne Family Trust. What I built in Sector 47 was not a black market. I stated the lie rolling off my tongue with absolute PR perfection. It was a forensic financial dragnet. I used the illicit supply routes to aggregate the metadata of every corrupt transaction your faction initiated. The ledger you just proudly presented to this board is not evidence against me. It is an unbroken 10-year history of your own market manipulation, tax evasion, and insider trading. The color rapidly drained from Victoria Thorne's face. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing silently. The numbers were irrefutable. They were her numbers. "This is fabricated," she finally shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. "He altered the data. "The data you just admitted to hacking and presenting yourself," Alex asked, his baritone slicing through her panic like a surgical blade. "A fascinating legal defense, Victoria. I am sure the Department of Justice will enjoy exploring it." He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He simply commanded the room's gravity. "Security," Alex said softly. The heavy oak doors opened. It was not corporate security. It was 4 federal agents from the SEC and the FBI, the very agents Victoria had tried to weaponize against me 3 days ago. "Victoria Thorne," the lead agent said, stepping into the room. "You are under arrest for securities fraud and violating the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." The boardroom was dead silent as the reigning Ice Queen of Manhattan was handcuffed and escorted out. The remaining board members, the ones who had not been implicated, sat frozen in terror, staring at Alex and me. They finally understood the dynamic. Alex owned the empire, but I controlled the executioners. By noon, the news broke on Bloomberg. The ousting of a corrupt board faction sent sterling empire stock surging by 12%. It was a flawless victory. That night, the penthouse was quiet. The manic energy of the corporate coup had faded, replaced by the heavy, expensive silence of the 90th floor. I was sitting on the leather sofa, the glowing skyline of New York reflecting in the floor-to-ceiling windows. I was not celebrating. I was doing what I always did, analyzing the aftermath. My battered notebook rested on my lap. Alex walked into the living room carrying 2 crystal glasses of Macallan 25. He was not wearing his suit jacket, and his tie was gone. He looked exhausted, yet thrumming with a dark, intense satisfaction. He handed me a glass. I took it, but my other hand instinctively reached for my cheap ballpoint pen. I prepared to click the pen. Before my thumb could depress the mechanism a second time, Alex reached out. He did not grab my wrist. He simply slid his large, warm hand over mine, his fingers wrapping around the plastic barrel of the pen, silencing it. "You do not need to calculate this, Jules," he murmured, his voice dropping into that low, vibrating register that always bypassed my logic centers. "The board is secured. The threat is neutralized. The math is done. The math is never done." I argued weakly, though I did not pull my hand away. Alex set his glass down on the coffee table. He gently took the pen from my fingers. He did not toss it aside. Instead, he picked up my battered notebook from my lap. He flipped past the pages of offshore routing numbers, past the crossed-out $5 million target, past the failed SWOT analysis. He found a blank page at the very end. He clicked the pen. He leaned over and wrote 2 lines in his sharp, elegant handwriting. He handed the notebook back to me. I looked at the page. Asset classification priceless. Owner Alexander Sterling. I stared at the ink. It was not a romantic declaration. It was a statement of absolute proprietary fact. It was the most arrogant, controlling, and utterly perfect thing he could have written. Alex sat down next to me on the sofa. He did not crowd me, but the sheer proximity of him was overwhelming. "I cover your variables," he said, his pale eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "I absorb your risks. I split my profits with you. You belong to me." He was speaking my language. Leverage ownership partnership. I looked from the notebook to the man who had burned millions of dollars just to let me play in a warehouse. The man who had physically caged me to keep me from running. The man who had just let me dismantle his own boardroom. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the 2 torn halves of the Swissair ticket. I did not say a word. I simply leaned forward and dropped them into the small, decorative ethanol fire pit burning on the glass table. We watched the paper curl, turn black, and disintegrate into ash. I turned back to Alex. I did not offer a dramatic speech. I just gave him the flat, sociopathic smile I usually reserved for closing a hostile takeover. "The contract is accepted, Alex, but I want 51% of the voting rights." Alex let out that rough, breathy laugh. He reached out his hand, sliding to the back of my neck, his thumb resting against my pulse point. "You are impossibly greedy," he whispered right before he pulled me in. "And you," I murmured against his mouth, finally letting the last of my defenses shatter, "are a highly acceptable return on investment." It has been exactly 14 months since the hostile takeover of the boardroom. The Sterling Empire did not just stabilize after the spectacular public arrest of Victoria Thorne. Under our newly consolidated leadership structure, it became an apex predator in the global market. My official title on the corporate masthead is Chief Strategy Officer. My unofficial title, whispered with a mix of reverence and sheer terror in the elevators and heavily encrypted Slack channels, is the Executioner. There is very little corporate drama on the executive floors these days. Factional infighting and boardroom coups require free time, and I ensure that anyone who might harbor treasonous thoughts is far too occupied trying to meet the crushing, mathematically perfect KPIs I designed for their respective departments. The remnants of Thorne's faction who managed to avoid federal indictment are currently working 80-hour weeks in our mid-level divisions, desperately trying to prove their loyalty to my algorithms. Survival in the Sterling Empire now requires absolute unwavering efficiency. I am the architect of that efficiency. I sat at the expansive mahogany desk in my office, a space that directly adjoined the CEO's suite through a private frosted glass door. The aggressive hum of industrial air conditioning from Sector 47 in Queens was a distant, almost nostalgic memory, replaced by the silent, climate-controlled perfection of the 90th floor. I pulled out my pen. Not the cheap plastic ballpoint from the basement, but a custom-weighted platinum Mont Blanc. It was an unsolicited gift from Alex. I had not wanted to switch, citing the perfectly acceptable utility of the plastic one, but he had simply taken my old pen, snapped it in half with casual violence, and replaced it with the Mont Blanc. Brand alignment, he had called it. A click sounded. The mechanism was smoother, considerably quieter, but the tactile feedback was still satisfying enough to anchor my thoughts. I was currently reviewing the quarterly budget projections for our new global logistics division, the legal, massively scaled evolution of the shadow network I had originally built to finance my escape. The frosted glass door opened without a knock. Only one person in the building possessed the clearance and the audacity to bypass my calendar. Alexander Sterling walked in. He was wearing a slate gray bespoke suit that fell perfectly over his broad shoulders, radiating the kind of effortless, lethal authority that usually made junior analysts forget how to breathe. He carried 2 cups of premium espresso, having bypassed my executive assistant entirely. He set 1 cup on my desk, placing it deliberately over a stack of physical expenditure reports I was auditing. Your proposed budget cuts for the European AI acquisition are excessively aggressive, Jules, Alex said, not bothering with the standard morning greeting. He leaned against the edge of my desk, crossing his arms and looking down at me with those pale, piercing eyes. We need their deep learning tech to corner the predictive algorithms market by Q4. Throttling their research and development budget by 20% will stall integration. I did not look up from my tablet. I clicked the pen. The European AI model is fundamentally flawed. They are burning venture capital on natural language processing vanity projects when the immediate profit vector is strictly in supply chain optimization. My cuts are not aggressive, Alex, they are corrective. If their CEO wants the 20% back, he can prove his algorithm can outtrade a standard index fund over a 30-day cycle. You are suffocating a long-term technological innovation for short-term logistical profit margins. He countered, his baritone voice dropping into the low argumentative register we both actively thrived on. I am maximizing shareholder value. And as a reminder, I hold 51% of the voting rights in this specific partnership. Alex let out that quiet, rough laugh. It was a sound he still reserved entirely for me, a crack in the ice of his public persona. He uncrossed his arms, leaned over, and placed both hands flat on my desk, invading my personal space with the deliberate heavy gravity of a man who owned everything he surveyed. "You are an impossible, terrifying creature," he murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips before rising to meet my eyes. The cold, sociopathic mask he wore for the rest of the world never existed in this room. Instead, there was an indulgence so deep, it bordered on ruinous. I am simply mathematically optimized. I corrected him, finally setting down the platinum Mont Blanc. He reached out his thumb, brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. The touch was grounding a physical anchor in a world constructed entirely of abstract leverage and digital wealth. Fine. You win the European budget constraint, but I expect a revised valuation model on my desk by Friday. You will have it by Thursday. Alex smiled, a genuine, dangerous expression that still spiked my heart rate, and leaned in to claim his concession. He pressed his mouth to mine in a brief, possessive kiss that tasted of rich espresso and absolute victory. When he pulled back, he did not leave immediately. He simply stood there for a moment, looking at me, looking at the monolithic empire we were running together. "Do not be late for the board meeting," he said, softly turning toward his private door. "I schedule the board meetings, Alex. They officially start when I arrive." He chuckled, shaking his head as the frosted glass slid shut behind him. The office was quiet again. I picked up my coffee and took a sip. I looked down at the Mont Blanc, then at the digital ledger glowing on my triple monitor setup. The numbers were clean, logical, and undeniably beautiful. 14 months ago, I was a supposedly broken kid, sitting in a windowless interrogation room, calculating the cheapest possible way to survive a corporate execution. I had wanted nothing more than to flee to hoard my $5 million and disappear into a quiet, irrelevant exile in the Swiss Alps. I opened my top desk drawer and glanced at the small, battered notebook resting inside. The page with the crossed-out $5 million target was still there, a paper monument to a severely underestimated personal valuation. I had taken the biggest calculated risk of my 2 lifetimes. I had invested all my capital, my freedom, my intellect, and the emotional firewall I had spent a decade building into a man who viewed control as his primary language. From a purely objective standpoint, it should have been a catastrophic failure of risk management. Emotional variables always tanked the portfolio. Instead, I was looking at the highest return on investment in Wall Street history. I had a multi-billion-dollar empire at my fingertips, a limitless supply of operational leverage, and a partner who did not just tolerate my ruthless pragmatism, but actively worshipped it. Alexander Sterling was the ultimate shield for my arrogance, the infinite capital for my ambition, and the only variable I would ever willingly accept into my system. A final click sounded. The morning sun crested over the Manhattan skyline, catching the edge of the glass tower and flooding my office with sharp, brilliant light. It washed over the financial ledgers on my screens, turning the cold clinical data into something warm, something remarkably alive. I smiled a real uncalculated smile, pulled the next acquisition file toward me, and got to work. The math was never truly done.